The opinions expressed by the host and guests on Where Did the Road Go are their own and do not represent those of WVBR or its management. Our aim is to explore the fringe, lost civilizations, alternative science, the paranormal, and much more. Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com, where you can send us questions for our live or future guests via email or the live chat room. And remember to subscribe to us on iTunes. And now welcome to this week's edition of Where Did the Road Go?
And this week on Where Did the Road Go? Live from Peru, we have Mr. Brien Foerster. Can you hear me, Brien?
Yes, I can.
All right. And this is the first Skype interview we've done on this show. And we discovered we're in the same time zone. So, what part of Peru are you in?
I'm in Cusco.
Okay. And that's one of the big ancient centers, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the center of the Inca civilization.
Okay. How did you get... Now, you do research mostly on ancient civilizations and technology used in ancient civilizations, stuff like that. How did you get started down this path?
I guess it was my interest in Native people, Native Canadians, Native Americans as a child. And so that led me to learning about their art and becoming a professional totem pole carver. And then I moved to Hawaii and I helped build a giant Hawaiian voyaging canoe. And after that, I just became interested in Polynesia, and that led me farther south to Peru.
Okay. And so originally you're from where?
From the Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada area.
Okay. And you wrote a book on the Hawaiian ancient culture as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
And how long ago was that?
That was about 2 years ago.
Oh, okay, that recent. I thought it was longer ago. Do you find connections between South America and Hawaii?
Definitely. One of my latest books is called Crimson Horizon, and that shows definite ancient connections between Easter Island and the west coast of South America, specifically Peru.
Okay. What about the rest of South America? Do you think there were separate groups there?
Well, it seems that Bolivia and Peru are the hotbeds in terms of very ancient civilizations. The most intriguing and mysterious ones are in that area. Some of the listeners might have heard of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, which are in Bolivia. And then the area around Cusco is where we find the ancient megalithic walls, where you have giant stones, multi-ton, that are fit together without any kind of mortar or cement, and you can't fit a human hair in between the blocks.
And how old are these walls?
Well, conventional historians say that they're, 600 to 900 years old. But some of the experts I brought down, geologists and also engineers and others, believe that we're looking at 12,000 plus year old buildings.
Okay. And why do they think they're only 600 years old?
Well, it's just the conventional mindset. Most archaeologists think that the Inca built everything, and the Inca entered Cusco about 1100 to 1200 AD and were crushed by the Spanish about 1532. So most archaeologists put all of Cusco and all of the major constructions in southern Peru and northern Bolivia in that kind of time frame.
Now, how do the Olmec figure into all this?
Well, the Olmec are a very interesting culture. There have only been about 10 books written about them. David Hatcher Childress, who was my co-author in one book, he wrote a book about the Olmec. And they lived in more or less southern Mexico, and they were a culture older than the Maya. So one thing that most people don't realize is the fact that the famous Mayan calendar, which, supposedly ended on December 21st, 2012, was in fact an Olmec calendar, and that the Olmec themselves may have inherited that calendar from a much older civilization.
And what is there? What evidence do we have for that type of a civilization, pre-Olmec?
Well, not too much. It's all quite speculation right now. Olmec territory is very much jungle. And so a lot of the organic remains, as in skeletons and other organic materials are very difficult to find and carbon date. But the Olmecs themselves are a very mysterious culture. Most people know about them in terms of the giant stone heads that have been found buried underground.
Right, and they actually have a more of an African look to them, don't they?
Well, they have a combination. Some of them look African, some look Chinese or Asian. And the growing theory about them is the fact that Olmec territory is very narrow in terms of landmass between the Pacific and Atlantic. So it's very possible that ancient seafarers from both Africa and Asia traveled to Olmec territory in the distant past, mixed with the local Indian population, and that's why you have the African look and the Asian look.
Okay, and as far as who built some of the 10,000-year-old date, do you think this would be the same culture that predates the Olmecs? Do you think there was one culture there 10,000 years ago?
Yeah, I think there was probably a global culture. Some people would call it Atlantis or the Atlanteans, but not the traditional idea that there was a continent that sank, but a global civilization that had different centers in strategic places around the world. One of them being South America, one being Central America, another one being Egypt.
Okay. What do you think about the theory that it could have been located on Antarctica?
That's an intriguing one, and that's something that Graham Hancock covers in the book Fingerprints of the Gods. There's a theory by a man called Charles Hapgood, which is that the crust of the Earth is like the skin of an orange, and that the entire crust may have shifted at one point in time, thousands of years ago. Another theory is that we're presently at 23.5 degrees in terms of the position of the tilt of our planet, and it's possible that 12,000 plus years ago we were actually completely vertical. So a shift to 23.5 degrees would have caused Antarctica, which is now presently the South Pole, to have been more temperate, and therefore it is quite possible that presently there are cities on Antarctica which are underneath possibly 2 miles of ice.
Right, and science pretty much accepts the fact that it was ice-free during the last ice age, don't they?
Well, I'm not sure about the last ice age, but there are, of course, very ancient maps, like the Piri-Reis map that shows ice-free Antarctica, and that supposedly wasn't known, or at least the actual shape of the land wasn't known until the 1950s by American scientists who were able to map underneath the ice surface itself.
So you think this culture, whether it had been Atlantis or whatever else, was a seafaring culture?
Oh, definitely. I think people have been traveling the oceans of the world for thousands upon thousands of years.
And we saw what's his name make the journey from across the Pacific in a very small boat. What was his name?
Thor Heyerdahl.
That's it. Yeah. Proving a lot of scientists wrong who say that couldn't have happened.
Yeah, and actually that was in 1947. He made it obvious that people could sail a very primitive raft from the west coast of Peru to Polynesia, but there's a more modern one. I think it was in either 1990 or 2000, and it was called the Viracocha, and they were able to sail from the west coast of Peru to Easter Island in less than 40 days.
Wow. Okay. Well, your co-author David Hatcher Childress always says that oceans are highways, not barriers.
Exactly.
So now Easter Island's kind of an anomaly in the middle of the ocean, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with the heads and stuff. Now, do you think that was a much bigger culture there at one point?
Well, I think the dating goes back much farther than conventional ideas. I was there with Robert Schock in November, and he believes that there were two distinct cultures, one being the Polynesians that go back possibly 2,000 years, but he thinks that there's a much older culture that lived there that could have been there in the beginning about 12,000 plus years ago. And what most people don't realize is that the famous heads on Easter Island aren't heads, they're all full bodies.
They're all full bodies.
All of them. There are not more than 900 of them. And the famous ones where you see just the neck and the head, the full body goes all the way down in the ground.
Oh, okay. I thought it was only the older ones that had full bodies. I didn't realize they were all like that.
Well, they all have full bodies. It's just that obviously the oldest ones are the ones which are the largest, and the majority of the structure is underground.
And I think Shock said they're also made from different types of stone too, right?
Yeah, that's true. Most of them are made of what's called volcanic tuff, which is not all that hard a stone, but there are some which are made out of basalt, which is incredibly hard.
Okay, and so do you think there was just a bigger island there, or do you think that they were just able to travel so easily that was a main area of like port?
Well, I think the island was at least slightly larger than it is now, but what's important is that Easter Island would have been very strategic. Anyone traveling the ocean would want to stop at different islands in order to replenish water, food, etc. And so if you're traveling from the west coast of South America, Easter Island would be at a very specific strategic point where you could replenish water and food supplies in order to keep going on with your journey.
Okay, and we keep hearing this date 10,000, 12,000 years ago. What is the importance of that?
Well, the growing evidence based on Robert Schoch's work, Graham Hancock's work, and others is that the end of the Ice Age was approximately 12,000 years ago. And the most recent evidence shows that the melting of the ice sheets, which most people think, would have taken 1,000 or thousands of years, may have only taken 3 years. So in that time period, the ocean levels would have risen by 350 feet, and that would have caused not only cities on the coasts of the different continents to flood and be buried underwater, but also create incredible catastrophes as the result of this movement or shift from ice to water. So you would have had a lot more volcanic activity, major weather changes around the planet, devastation of wildlife and human life as well, and also the erasing of a lot of knowledge, because as the population was rapidly reduced, those who were the keepers of knowledge would have been wiped out as well.
And a lot of the knowledge that was kept has been destroyed by invading cultures as well.
Oh, very much so. That's a global phenomenon. In the case of Peru, the Inca had a system called the quipu, where they had these knotted cords that recorded not only numbers but also language. And so the Catholic Church, one of their first duties was to burn as many of these as possible. And the same thing with the Maya, with their codices that were written on a type of paper, they were all burned. So that's a historic and global phenomenon, the destruction of ancient knowledge.
Do you think any of this stuff might still be out there somewhere, like buried in a tomb or in an underground vault of some sort?
Well, I think some may be buried, some may be in the Vatican libraries, others could have been destroyed. The full picture, any possible way of destroying a culture's knowledge and history is one thing that a conquering people does and has done.
Right, and that ends up being destroying our own history as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have also Machu Picchu down that way, down in South America, and you've investigated that as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been to Machu Picchu 18 times, wow. And it's very evident that the core center of Machu Picchu is thousands of years older than the Inca. So as in many sites in Peru and Bolivia, as well as many other places on the planet, just because a certain culture lives or lived there doesn't mean that they started everything from nothing. So Machu Picchu is a classic example of a site which is several thousand years old, was refound, in this case by the Inca, and then expanded into quite a large complex on top of a mountain.
And Machu Picchu is not the actual name of the city, is it?
No, the actual name of the city isn't known. Machu Picchu is the name of the mountain itself. And so Hiram Bingham, who was the American who discovered and made it famous, he named it Machu Picchu just because that was a easy term to coin.
Okay, and why does mainstream science or mainstream archaeology attribute that to the Incas? Just because they expanded upon it?
Well, I think it's just convenient, and you find that in a lot of other places such as Pumapunku, Tiwanaku, and other very ancient sites. It's easy to simply say, well, this culture built it, rather than look deeper and bring in other experts of other disciplines such as geologists and engineers, and try to look at these sites from a more multidisciplinary view.
Right. Isn't there a story about the Inca actually trying to repair part of Machu Picchu?
Well, actually,
where they were bringing up, they couldn't get even a smaller block up the mountains.
Well, actually, there's a case where that's more Sacsayhuaman, which is this monstrous wall just above the city of Cusco, and that's where we find up to 125-ton shaped blocks. And so there is a story that one of the Inca rulers decided that he was going to attempt to do something similar, and so he tried to bring this giant stone down from a quarry, and it wound tumbling off the side of the mountain, killing a bunch of people, and so that project was abandoned.
Yeah, well, probably for good reason.
I think so, yeah.
Does this not bother mainstream archaeology that there's no easy way to move these size of blocks?
Well, that's the problem, is that they try to explain how it was done, and then when you bring an engineer in, such as Christopher Dunn, and you say, is this the way it logically would have been done? He and others would say no. They had to have some kind of more sophisticated technology rather than cutting trees down and using them as rollers. Mm-hmm. Especially when you're looking at the terrain of Cusco, which is very mountainous. So that and the same thing, of course, in Egypt, where you have the Great Pyramid made up of 2,200,000 stones, of multi-ton, and they're saying that slaves drag these blocks across the sand or something. It's illogical from an engineering perspective.
Right, and how do you have any guess even on how these things were moved and put into place?
Well, it seems like the ancient builders had much more of an ability to manipulate matter than we do. They seem to not necessarily be involved in anti-gravity, but they seem to have the ability to neutralize gravity, so making multi-ton stones virtually weightless. And also in terms of the way the stones were shaped, they couldn't have been shaped using bronze chisels and stone hammers. They had to have had some kind of high vibrational technology to almost or possibly even manipulate the nature of the molecular structure of the stone itself and be able to soften it in order to push the stones together to make them fit so tightly.
And there are legends about sound technology and stuff from these cultures, aren't there?
Oh, definitely. In Egypt and in South America, and even I've heard in Tibet, there are stories where using sonic technology or high vibration, they were able to not only move the stone, but also manipulate it and shape it.
Okay, and so this is how you think they got them so tightly pieced together?
I think so.
And they're not like lined up like a wall that we would build today. They're lined up in odd sort of jigsaw-like patterns.
Yeah, the most intriguing ones, again, such as Sacsayhuaman, they're polygonal. Each stone is of a very different shape and size. The way we build is we like to use uniform shapes like a brick. So that way you can know if you want something 100 feet long, you use 100 bricks a foot long. But these people seem to have preferred, for some reason, to use unique shapes, and that makes, technically that's an incredibly complicated process.
And what's the advantage to building like that?
Well, the obvious thing is it makes things earthquake-proof, because if you don't have any mortar between the stone and you have direct contact, the stones fit tighter, especially if each one is a different shape, then it becomes like a matrix. But I think it's much more sophisticated. I think what they were attempting to do and successfully doing was that they were able to create structures, as in buildings that were so tightly fitting together that harmonics were involved. I think these buildings were meant to vibrate.
Really? What would be the purpose of that?
Well, in the case of Egypt, with the Great Pyramid, and that's the theory of Chris Dunn, is the fact that the Great Pyramid was actually an energy generator. It was a power plant.
Right. And what would they use the walls for? The same type of thing, do you think?
That I don't know. But I just know that you're looking at something similar in terms of incredible precision that is way beyond that which is needed for structural strength.
Now, what about alignments with these structures? Are they all aligned to the sky as well, to the stars?
No one's really done a lot of work on that, so I would really like to get Robert Boval, who some of you may have heard of from studies in Egypt. I'd love to get him to come down to Peru and look at archaeoastronomical alignments of some of the buildings.
Okay. Now, Pumapunku is pretty much destroyed, isn't it?
Oh, very much so.
What happened with that city?
Well, the most recent thing, as in over the past 500 years, is the fact that it's been used as a quarry. As soon as the Spanish arrived, they started taking Pumapunku apart and built some of their churches and other buildings in the capital city of La Paz out of it. More recently, local people have used the stone to build their own houses, and they even use dynamite to blow up some of the structures in order to make the rail bed for the railway. So I think only about 5 or 10% of Pumapunku is left in situ.
Do you ever get the feeling when you're looking at these structures and you see what we've done to them that we're like children messing with some kind of adults, tools and structures?
Well, I think definitely. I think whoever made these buildings were in some ways far more sophisticated than we are. They had forms of technology that are science fiction to us. But of course, the mainstream academics won't even listen to ideas like that. They have this very simple idea that we started as hunter-gatherer cavemen, and then we evolved to this point where we have laptops and iPhones without any interruption in between. But if you study any ancient cultures, they tend to talk about civilizations coming and going, that you have rises or you have peaks and then troughs. And the concept of Atlantis is the classic case, where you have a very highly advanced civilization that does something very stupid, and then they wind up getting destroyed. But I think Atlantis wasn't an actual place, but I think it's a good model about the history of our planet and the history of humanity.
Okay, and the Lake Titicaca, that was also a spiritual center area, wasn't it?
It was, and it still is, very much so. There are some very intriguing sites around the edges of Lake Titicaca, and even in modern times, it's very much a UFO hotspot in terms of sightings.
Really? Why do you think? Do you think there's a connection between the ancient cultures there, or because it's just a power spot?
I think both. When you talk to local people, they simply say that UFOs are a very common sight and have been for decades, centuries, and even millennia.
And the lake is actually far smaller than it used to be, isn't it?
It is. If you travel there, you'll notice that there's an incredible floodplain. Originally, it would have been much larger, and some speculate that possibly its maximum size, again, was about 12,000 years ago.
And again, that 12,000 year date, that relates to the golden age of a lot of cultures as well.
Yes, it does. And also, you'll have Robert Schoch on next week, and he'll talk about things like the precessional cycle. He'll talk about solar activity. He believes that around 12,000 years ago, there was a plasma outburst from the sun, which caused the end of the Ice Age very rapidly, and that wiped out most sophisticated, if not all sophisticated, global civilizations.
Right, and obviously one of the questions people throw out is, if there was such an advanced civilization, why aren't we finding their garbage, their Coke cans and things like that?
Well, I think to some extent they weren't as, I think we're a very foolish culture. We're a very destructive culture. We're a very messy culture. So, I don't think necessarily that other cultures created disposable products the way that we do. But the other thing is that a lot of archaeologists don't dig deep enough. So there tends to be quite often a preset concept about age. In the case of Pumapunku, they've only dug down about 2 feet, and they've come up with sterile soil. So they think, well, that's it. Nobody was here before that. But they haven't dug deeper, or they haven't even entertained the idea that possibly Pumapunku was struck by an enormous wave of mud as the result of the breaking or the spilling of quite a major lake at one point, which swept through the whole Tiwanaku Pumapunku complex and emptied any artifacts of significance into Lake Titicaca.
Has there been any dredging of Lake Titicaca at any point?
No, there's been limited exploration, but the Bolivian government, to some degree, is very restrictive for some reason. So there have been projects. Even Jacques Cousteau in the 1960s, I think, dove in Lake Titicaca and found some interesting stones and things, but there's never been a really significant study of the depths of that lake.
Now, I've heard different people put forth the theory that these places were much closer to sea level at some point in the far past. Have you heard these theories?
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that. Some people speculate that the Andes Mountains, which are now more than 20,000 feet tall, didn't exist 10 to 12,000 years ago. I think that's pushing reality a little bit much. I haven't seen conclusive evidence of that. A lot of people talk about Pumapunku as being a seaport, but I think it was in fact a lake port. It's presently about 7 miles from Lake Titicaca. So 10 to 12,000 years ago, the lake would have lapped right up on the shoreline of Pumapunku. And there are other major sites which are set back about the same distance. So they again would have been on the lake shore 10 to 12,000 years ago.
Now, do you think the discovery of a site like Gobekli Tepe in Turkey is going to change the way archaeologists look at South America?
Oh, very much so. I mean, again, that's why it's great that you're going to have Robert Schoch on, because he studied Gobekli Tepe quite a lot, and it's been carbon dated at being 12,000 years old. It may be older. They've only actually started to excavate. It seems to be quite a huge complex, and it was seemingly buried on purpose.
Yeah, which is bizarre.
Very.
So, have you seen any change in archaeology and their viewpoints since that's been discovered, or have they just kind of like bubbled that off for the moment?
Not that I've seen. I depend more upon independent investigators rather than the, I'm not trying to bash academia. It's just that there is a tendency for independent investigators to be a little more open-minded and dig, literally and figuratively dig a little deeper. And Graham Hancock is the classic example of that with his watershed book, Fingerprints of the Gods. He was a journalist who just found certain things intriguing and began to explore them. He sold, I believe he sold 5 million copies of that book.
Yeah.
He's been trashed by academics ever since he published it. But he holds to his thoughts, and people like myself and many others back him up because what he's found is completely logical.
Now, what evidence are you finding in South America? I think you even posted something today that shows they had some sort of high technology. I think you found a drill hole or something today, didn't you, or yesterday?
Yeah, that's at a site called Ollantaytambo, which is several hundred acres in size. And that was with a film crew that I happened to be with from a series called Watchers. And one of these guys just happened to, actually the cameraman, director, happened to sit down on this large megalithic block of stone. And he said, "What's this?" And it was a circular hole about 1 inch in diameter filled with water. And so I flicked the water out, and I could see the spiral groove of a drill. And as far as I can tell, no one has been doing any, drilling or cutting work there for at least 600 years. So that's a curious example of the, possible evidence of lost ancient technology, where the ancient builders had either technology similar to ours, or in some cases even superior.
Well, I know Christopher Dunn had talked about them using sonic drills and such in Egypt. Do you see the same type of thing in South America?
Yeah, the fun thing is that this is one of the first examples that I saw, which I think is similar to what Chris has found in Egypt on the Giza Plateau. And when I posted that on Facebook, Chris almost immediately started to question me about what evidence I have about that. So actually what I told him is that I'm going to use his technique, which is to get what's called forming wax, which is like a soft wax that you can use, and I'm going to put that inside this circular depression, and get an impression of what these grooves look like, photograph it, and send it to him, and then he can tell me how fast he thinks the drill was moving that made this hole.
Oh, okay. And Pumapunku has some very precise cutting on some of the remaining blocks too, doesn't it?
Oh, well, actually, Pumapunku is completely astonishing. It has flat stone surfaces, which if you take a metal, precision metal ruler and put it onto the stone, it's as flat as a glass tabletop. It is profoundly, in my view, precise. And I've also found evidence of hundreds of drill holes. And we're not talking about somebody with a stick and a piece of flint tied on the end. We're talking, basically a drill press at work. And even conventional archaeologists state that Pumapunku is about 2,000 years old, but I think it's possibly much older than that. And of any place in South America, Pumapunku is what they call the smoking gun in terms of evidence of lost ancient technology.
All right. Okay, we're going to take a quick 30-second break, and we'll be back with Brien in just a moment on where did the road go.
The opinions expressed by the host and guests on Where Did the Road Go are their own and do not represent those of WVBR or its management. Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com, where you can send us questions for our live guests via email or the live chat room. You can also check out our upcoming schedule, blog, links section, book reviews, videos, and links to our Twitter, Facebook, iTunes, and much more. That's wheredidtheroadgo.com.
And we are on with Brien Foerster, live from Peru. You still there, Brien?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now you do tours in these places, don't you?
Yeah, my wife and I do tours on occasion. It's not a full-time job, but we love exploring Peru and Bolivia with guests from all over the world.
Okay. Yeah. What do you have coming up as far as tours go?
Well, we just finished one last week with this film crew from the U.S., and in June we have one with Dr. Rita, who is actually she's intriguing because she's a intuitive psychic, and also she also has other amazing capabilities, and so that'll be different. Normally I bring scientists down, but but she wants to look at these sites intuitively, and that's in June, and that's on my website. And then in August, we have Lloyd Pye of the Starchild Project. He'll be down here for 2 weeks. And then after that, we have Graham Hancock in October. And between the tours, we tend to do smaller ones, but those are the 3 major ones that we have coming up.
All right, and the website people can find that info at is where?
www.hiddenincatours.com.
All right, so let's move on to the I believe it's your latest book, The Elongated Skulls.
Mm-hmm.
And you co-wrote that with David Hatcher Childress?
Yeah, that's right.
And the full title is The Mystery of the Elongated Skulls, right?
Yeah, the enigma of cranial deformation.
Okay, and what is cranial deformation, first of all?
Well, cranial deformation is a process that was global. Most commonly, it happened about 2,000 years ago in different parts of the world. And what it was the babies of royal families had their heads bound in a very gradual process, somewhat like, some people say like the way the Chinese used to bind the feet, but we believe this was a more or less painful process. And what it did is it altered the shape of the human skull. The ultimate examples, or classic examples, are those of the Paracas people of the coast of Peru, who literally had cone heads 2,000 years ago.
Wow, and why would they do this?
Well, the main reasoning behind it is that, number one, it's believed that the children would be more intelligent. Number two, they thought it was a aesthetic, attractive feature. And number three, which is the most intriguing, is that they say that that's what their ancestors looked like.
Now, is there any evidence that any of these skulls are not intentionally deformed, but were like that naturally?
Yeah, that's what I'm working on now. The majority of them were cranial deformed because we see evidence of where the binding material, which was either cloth or textile or some kind of string, was used in order to shape the skull, normally over the period of about 3 years. But we have some tantalizing examples that look incredibly natural. And so those are the ones that I'm focusing most of my effort on now.
Okay, and how do you go about proving they're natural versus altered? Aside from the binding marks, do they have any other different features to them?
Yeah, they have a number of different features. Number one is the fact that there are a different number of cranial plates. There are fewer cranial plates than in normal humans. Number two is the jaws are a lot larger. Number three, the eye sockets are much bigger. Number four, there are these interesting 2 holes in the back of the skull that seem to have been for both nerve and blood flow and other factors that we're also looking at. And that's why I brought a number of doctors, nurses, and other medical people to see the skulls in Paracas in order to, for them to ascertain for themselves what it is they're looking at. And so far, they've all been completely dumbfounded.
Wow. So we could be looking at a different variety of the human race.
Well, yeah, and we're actually conducting DNA tests right now on 12 different specimens to see if there are anomalies in the DNA. And so the main geneticist, who is Dr. Melba Ketchum, she believes simply from looking at photos of the skulls themselves that they are not what we call human beings. They seem to be some kind of variant, whether they're a subspecies of us or something even more strange is something that the DNA will have to tell us.
Huh. Okay. When do you think those type of results are going to be coming in?
Well, I was hoping for the initial results last month. I still have hopes for this month, but it could very well be next month that we'll get phase 1 of the information, and there should be phase 2 and phase 3 after that. The first phase should tell us whether these people are 100% Homo sapiens like us or not. The second one will be more detailed in terms of trying to if there are anomalous areas in the strands of the DNA, do those strands relate or segments relate to other beings on the planet? And number three would be literally looking at the possibility of these being, if it goes that far, of these people being actual alien human hybrids.
Okay. Now, cranial deformation isn't limited to South America, is it?
No, it was a global practice. It was most common about 2,000 years ago. Examples have been found possibly in Egypt, but also in Europe, Russia, Iraq, parts of the Pacific, Central America, and different areas of Africa. So it was a global phenomenon. My interest in the future is to see if they're all related, or whether this practice developed independently.
How would that even happen? I mean, it seems like such a weird thing to do in the first place.
Well, it's a very bizarre thing to do in the first place, but again, the commonality globally is the fact that if you're able to find descend, it has been practiced up until the 20th century in Africa. Some say that it still is being practiced in Congo, on the west coast of Africa, as well as in Melanesia. And so the three characteristics, again, are number one, it's supposed to make the children more intelligent. Two, it's attractive. And three, it's what the ancestors looked like. And again, it's only done and only has been done amongst the royal bloodline of any of these societies.
Now, a lot of these societies also feel that their royal bloodline connects to the gods.
Yeah, that's quite a common concept.
So do you think that's related to the shape of the heads, that maybe these other beings with the elongated heads were their gods in a sense because they were so more advanced or different?
I'm starting to think that way, and that's why the DNA tests and results will be intriguing, because if it turns out that these people are different from us, then that leads you down the road towards much more intriguing research, and even, as slim or slight as the possibility may be, it may lead to the idea that extraterrestrials have been on the planet and have mixed with humanity and created, the so-called ancient gods of different cultures.
Right. Now, you mentioned Lloyd earlier. He's in the Starchild skull. That's a different type of skull, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. The Starchild is very different, and Lloyd has been studying the Starchild for 12 years. There are at least 25 different physical characteristics of the Starchild which make it non-human and not related to any of the great apes or primates. So that's why it's intriguing that he'll be coming down to visit me in August with, it'll be a tour group, so it'll be open to the public. And he's only been here once, but he's never actually had hands-on contact with the elongated skulls, and so that's something I will definitely be able to let him, play around with.
And the Starchild skulls are one of a kind as far as we know, right?
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing for Lloyd, is that if there were 10 Starchilds or 100 Starchilds, then he would be able to compare, one with many others, but he's only been able to find the one. And so that, I honor the man for having the guts to, to continue with his study after 12 years and all the ridicule that he's had to put up with.
Right. Well, and any new idea that goes against the generally accepted theory is going to be ridiculed, whether it's, scientific or what.
Well, exactly, including the fact that, the idea that the Earth is flat, that took quite a while to figure out wasn't exactly the case.
Now, I have a question from a listener who was asking if you had any theories on why so many elongated skulls had trepanation surgery.
Yeah, I do. I think trepanation was something that started to occur once the natural elongated skull people started to die out, and you had, mixing with normal humans. That's when the that's when the deformation started to happen more and more, and it caused reshaping of the human brain. And I think what they were attempting to do through surgery was to literally bring the mental level of the ancient ones, the small g gods, back. So they were playing around with things like the pituitary gland and other glands in the brain in order to bring back certain powers that I think the ancient ones had. And trepanation was so common, especially amongst the Paracas people. And the miraculous thing is that quite a high percentage of those that had this open brain surgery survived for years, if not decades.
And that seems unusual if they were primitives.
Well, yeah, clearly these people knew what they were doing. No one has a clue where they got the knowledge to be able to conduct brain surgery 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. But one thing we do know, and this went through all the way to Inca times, because the Inca did trepanation too. But what they would do is after they would cut the skull open and fiddle with the brain, doing whatever it was they were trying to figure out, then they would put a sheet of either gold or silver over top, a very thin sheet. And in the case of gold, of course, gold doesn't react to the body, so there would be no rejection. And silver is naturally antibiotic. And there's a great example, actually, of a skull in one of the museums in Lima where the silver plate was left in permanently, and so the bone grew around it but didn't cover it. So that person definitely lived for a long time after this surgery happened.
Wow. Have you found any evidence? Oh, well, actually, the first question: how old? Do you have any dating on the skulls you think are natural, like naturally elongated?
Only one so far, and we've been able to carbon-14 test it at 2,350 years, but I think the natural ones would have to date back, the majority, much older. The trouble is that most of the museums will not allow access to their skulls or their collections of skulls by me or possibly even PhD academics. So that's where the difficulty is right now. But we do have one positive dating.
Okay, and that's fairly old, but not super ancient.
Yeah.
Have you found any evidence down there of like giants or anything of that sort?
Well, the funny thing is that that's what we're looking at right now, and that's why this film group were here. I've been hearing rumors of there being skeletons being found which are taller than 2 meters, which is about 7 feet. And those aren't giants, but they're big.
Right.
Big people, when you take into consideration that the average Inca supposedly was about 5'3". So I'm hoping to get access to a graveyard in the next month or two that has a number of these, quote unquote giant skeletons, 2 meters, 2.2 meters. Yeah, that's something I'm looking at now. The trouble is that any great examples of giant remains that have been found, especially in North America, have been completely covered up and hidden. The ones from the Ohio Mounds, ones from the Lovelock Cave in Nevada,
right.
Ones from Catalina Island. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to get access to specimens before they get, literally abducted by the powers that be and get, shoved in boxes or warehouses never to be seen again.
Yeah. All right, let's talk for a couple minutes here about the Ancient Aliens series, which you've been a part of.
Yeah.
And you've been on how many episodes, did you say?
9.
9. And did they tape all of that at once, or did they come down to see you repeatedly?
They came down twice, and the thing is that they did offer to let me be on more episodes, but they wanted me to fly to Los Angeles, and I said, I think you should actually pay for my plane ticket. So I could have been on more. I may be on more in the future, but I think they have to pony up the money if they want me to talk. It's just kind of fair.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we do have other projects in the works, other documentaries. I'll be in Egypt in April with Chris Dunn and Stephen Mailer and others, looking at pre-pharaonic Egypt. The fact that the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid, etc., are probably at least 10 to 12,000 years old, and that's obviously something you'll be discussing with Dr. Schock next week.
Yes, and when you look at the show Ancient Aliens, first of all, it took off, I think, bigger than anyone expected. But do you think they regret calling it Ancient Aliens and limiting what they can cover on it?
I don't think so. I think, I've been a fan of it ever since the beginning. I actually was in shock when I was actually allowed to be on it. But I think it is kind of limiting to some degree. They've had, they're into season 5 now, and they would have to spend a lot of money in order to get to very inaccessible places in order to continue the show too much longer, I think. I wish them all the success in the world. It's just that I'm kind of moving off into more, what I would honestly have to say more scientific-based concepts.
As opposed to speculative.
Well, it's just, Ancient Aliens is great for the general public. I just want to get into something a little more scientific. I don't want to isolate myself from the public, but it's just, I want more evidence to present rather than, kind of speculative things.
Okay. How likely do you think that the ancient alien explanation applies to these cultures of great antiquity versus just a natural progression of human culture?
Well, the thing is, it could be either, and what we need is, or even a combination of both, but what we need, obviously, is more time and more evidence in order to fill the story in a little better. I in no way say that the concept of ancient aliens or alien contact is impossible. I think that's a very narrow-minded viewpoint, but I'm not jumping on that bandwagon wholeheartedly. I'd like to see, that's what the DNA testing, not just the ones we're doing now, but over the course of the next years and decades, will let us get a view into the window of.
Now, there's a decent number of serious researchers studying this stuff, people like yourself, Christopher Dunn, Graham Hancock, etc. How long do you think before mainstream science might open their eyes a little bit to look at what you're looking at?
I'm personally not all that concerned. I think that what we're presenting belongs to the general public. I don't think we have to explain ourselves to the academic community. So it's up to the 7 billion people on this planet to figure out for themselves what they wish to believe or not believe based upon the evidence presented to them.
Okay, all right. You also did some work on the Nazca Lines, didn't you?
Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time near Nazca. Paracas, where the elongated skulls are in fact only about 4 hours drive from Nazca. So they are actually interrelated, and that's something that we get into great depth with on the tours that we do.
Okay. Do you think there's some meaning behind the lines? Are they just decorations?
Well, I think the difference is the fact that the animal figures were made at least 1,000 years before the lines were made, and I think most of the lines are very pragmatic. I think they were done to track underground water sources, because Nazca is a complete desert, and without underground water you can't grow anything. So the ancient Nazca people did tap into the ground and find underwater aquifers, and I think some of the lines, not all of them, but some of the lines were made in order to reference underground water channels.
Okay. I have heard that before. I didn't know if there was anything to it or not. Interesting. All right. We're running low on time here. Again, people can find your upcoming tours where?
At www.hiddenincatours.com.
And your latest book is the Elongated Skulls one with David Hatcher Childress. You said you had one in Hawaii just recently. What other books have you published?
I published 12. They're all available on Amazon and also on my website. And I'm starting to publish through lulu.com as well.
Okay, and what is your website?
www.hiddenincatours.com.
Don't you have another one?
I also have a video one for all of my best videos.
Right.
That's www.hiddenincavavideos.com.
Okay, I thought there was a Brien Foerster site too.
There is, but I don't really use that. Use that.
Okay, all right.
My webmaster has gone kind of crazy with setting up all these domain names for me, and I don't have time to service all of them.
Okay. So what is the next stuff you're going to be working on? You mentioned the Giants. Anything else coming up for you?
Actually, all the above. I'm very much looking forward to the tour of Egypt in April. Very much looking forward to the tour here in Peru with Dr. Rita Louise, also with Lloyd Pye in August. And luckily, living in Cusco, I can not just walk out the door, but I'm very close to very ancient sites here, many of which have not been satisfactorily explained. And so I'm just looking forward to decades of playing Indiana Jones.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Brien, and best of luck on everything you're doing. And again, hiddenincatours.com, right?
Yep. And absolutely my pleasure, and have me back anytime.
All right. Thank you very much. And taking you out with some Psyche Corporation, Last Exit for the Lost is up next.
Come in. Do you read me? Do you understand the numbers pouring over your connection? To perfection. 583. Have you heard the singing soaking into our transmission? 21, 34, 55, 89, 144. Whence came this dream that haunts my mind? Behind a curtain, outside of time. Can you hear the ballet it plays, the whirring of the world? Can you hear the ballet it plays, the whirring of the world? Can you hear the ballet it plays, the whirring of the world? Come in, we hear you loud and clear, beginning our conversion of the signal here. 233, 377, 610, 987. Whence came this song? Foreign and familiar. I sighted you the sky. Can you hear the ballet it plays, the whirring of the world? Can you hear the ballet it plays, the whirring of the world? Can you hear the ballet it plays, the whirring of the world? The great invisible empire is bashing down the door. Please this time don't mistake it for static or magic. Now it's time to be wary. You are getting to the heart of the universe. Ventricles and atrial chambers number 1597 and counting. And counting. Can